showers of blessings today and always. I had the privilege to read a beautiful story, The Greatest Gift, by Philip Van Dorenstern. It was Christmas Eve, and George stood on the bridge looking at his village beautifully lit up, and Christmas was all in the air. He could hear the church bells, he could hear the choir singing. But George was heavy in his heart, and he looked down at the deep waters and was contemplating suicide. He was dejected. He wanted to end his life. As he leaned forward over the bridge, a voice called out and said, "I would never do such a thing." Immediately, George stopped and he turned around to see who it was. It was a short, fat man, a middle-aged man, who came up to George and said, "I would never do something like that." So George looked at him and was surprised and said, "What? What wouldn't you do?" So the man said, "What you were planning to do." George was taken aback, wondering how this man could read his mind. So George said, How do you know what I was thinking of?" So the short man said, "On Christmas Eve, having such a beautiful wife, Mary, and your mother and children, you should never be thinking of doing something like this." George was totally confused and surprised that the man knew all about him. So he asked the man again, "How do you know about me? How do you know what I was thinking?" So the man said, "Well, it is our business." And George wondered what would be his business. The man continued, "You have a good life. You have a good job at the bank. And you're still young and healthy. So you should never think of something like this." Instantly, George said, "But I'm fed up with life. I'm fed up with this boring life. I don't seem to be moving anywhere. And people around me are leading such exciting life. And my life is a total failure. I really want to die." The man looked at him as George kept ranting about his misfortune. Finally, George said, "I really wish I had never been born." Instantly, the face of the man lit up and he said, "There you are. What did you say?" So George repeated, "I wish I had never been born." So the man said, "Officially, your wish is granted. From now, just remember, you were not born at all." George was surprised. He said, "What?" So the man just gave him a bag and he said, "There are some brushes inside. You just take this with you, go back to town. Things will be different now. And your wish that you had never been born is granted." And before George could say anything, the man just disappeared. George instantly felt a change in his energy. He felt happy. He felt good. and he really wanted to go back to his town. So he took the bag of brushes in his hand and he started walking back towards his town. And now, when he looked at his town, he could see and feel and embrace the beauty, the happiness, the joy, and the goodness of Christmas that surrounded and filled his village. He was so happy. As he went, the first house he passed by was an old man's house, who George remembered having had a quarrel with, because George had rammed his car into the old man's old maple tree. And the tree had been damaged, and the old man was very upset with that. And George felt some sort of closeness and was drawn towards that maple tree now. So he went towards that maple tree and he touched the trunk of the tree, looking for the place where he had caused damage to it. And to his surprise, he saw that there was no damage on the maple tree. The trunk was perfectly okay. He had a closer look at it, thinking maybe the old man had done it up. But when he looked closer and observed keenly, he realized that absolutely no damage was there on the maple tree. It was as beautiful as always. Then George felt a churn in his stomach. Oh my God, maybe the man at the bridge has really granted my wish that I had never been born. So he quickly runs to the bank where he used to work. And he was shocked to see the bank as an old building, literally in ruins, and just a little light bulb was shining in the office inside. And George was very sure that he had switched on the light on the porch in the bank before he left. But he could see no light on. And he could see the building was in total ruin. It didn't even seem as if there was anyone working in the bank. So when he saw the light in the office, he just opened the door. He flew open and he rushed inside. And he saw Jim, the real estate agent, seated at the desk. Jim looked up at him and said, "Who are you? What do you want? Are you here to buy this property?" So George said, "What? You're going to sell this property? Isn't the bank working?" So Jim looked at him rather surprised and said, "Are you new to this village? This bank has stopped working for nearly the past 10 years because of one man, Marty, who had robbed this bank of nearly $50,000, and we are still hunting for him." Immediately, George remembered Marty. Marty and George studied together and they were great friends, and they had both applied for the job at the bank, and only George had got the job and not Marty. Now George realized that because since he had never been born, Marty had got the job, and this is what had happened. So immediately George thought of his wife Mary and Marty's brother Arthur, because George and Arthur had dated Mary together, and George had finally married Mary. So he turned to Jim and said, "He had a brother, right, Arthur? What happened to him?" So Jim said, "Oh, he lives up the hill with his wife Mary, and they have 2 children. And he is really giving a tough time for the family." George was heartbroken. Oh my God, what is happening? So now he wanted to rush to see Mary and see what was happening there. As he rushed out of the bank and down the road, he saw his parents' house. He thought, why not stop there, see them, and then continue to see Mary. As he stepped into his parents' house, the dog instantly started growling and barking and rushed towards him menacingly. And he shouted, "Brownie, Brownie," but the dog did not listen. It was just coming on to him. Instantly, an old man came and held the dog, and George realized it was his father. The father turned to George and said, "Who are you, young man? May I help you?" So George said, "I want to meet the lady of the house." So the father tied the dog, and George walked into the house. And when he saw his mother asked him, "Young man, why are you here? Who are you?" So he said, "I'm here to sell brushes." The company, it's a cleaning company, who are giving away free brushes for Christmas. So his mother said, "I don't think I can really help you. I don't think I need any brushes." So George said, "No, this is for free. It's a compliment from the company." The mother told him, "Why don't you take a seat and have something warm to drink?" As George looked around the room, he saw a photograph which he and his brother Harry had taken one day. But now, when he looked at the photograph, he noticed that it was only Harry there. So he turned towards his mother and said, "I know him. I have met him. He's Harry, isn't he?" The mother looked at him confused, with tears in her eyes. She said, "You could not have met him. This is my son. On the day this photograph was taken, he was 16 years old. He drowned when he went swimming, and he died." George remembered that day so vividly when Harry and he had gone to the studio to take the photograph. And on their way back, they had decided to take a swim in the river, and Harry had suffered from severe cramps in the water, and George had rescued him and brought him home safe. And now he understood that Harry was no more. He grew anxious to see what had happened to his wife, so he ran out of the house and went straight up to the house where Mary lived. And he knew where Mary lived because after his marriage to Mary, they lived in the house given by Mary's father as a wedding gift. And he knew now Arthur would have got the house and they would be living there. So he rushes to the house. He knocked at the door and it was opened by Mary herself. Mary looked at him and said, "May I help you?" So he said, "I'm here to sell brushes. In fact, the company is giving away brushes for free for Christmas." Mary was delighted to see the brushes, so she asked him to come in. When he went into the house, two children came running around. It was a boy and a girl, and they looked so much like Arthur, and instantly George knew that Mary was married to Arthur. As he was handing the brush to Mary, there was a knock at the door and Arthur walked in. He seemed very mean, very ill-tempered, and with a string of foul words, he grumbled and shouted at George, saying that he was never for salespeople and to go out of the house immediately. George could not take this anymore. He ran out, he ran towards the bridge, looking for that man, begging him to relieve him of this. He sees the man standing at the bridge. So George ran up and said, "Please, let me get back my life. I cannot stand to see the changes in my town and the people I love because of me not being there." So the short man looked at George and smiled. "Well, that is what you wished for, right? You wished that you had never been born. But now do you realize, if you had never been born, what are all the things that the people you had loved would have to go through?" George shook his head and said, "I perfectly understand. Please let me have my life back." The short man smiled and says, "Well, since it is Christmas Eve, this will be the gift to you, the greatest gift, and that is the gift of being alive." George was so happy. He literally ran back to his village. And as he crossed the maple tree, he could see the damage that he had caused the tree. He felt relieved. Yes. So from there you can just imagine what it would be. So he goes and meets everyone, and everyone is happy. The greatest message here is this: many of you at times may feel, "What a life, it is so boring. I wish I had never been born." But your presence, your life does make beautiful, happy differences to so many people that you cannot even think of. So be happy, stay happy, for you have the greatest gift of all, the gift of being alive.